I said we were going to talk about tantrums. Let's talk about this. We talked a little bit yesterday about biting, and different behaviors come with different challenges, right? Because biting has its own challenges. Sometimes we have to make sure where we are physically in space so that the child can't bite us. Tantrums are an entirely different kettle of fish, right? But I got to tell you, some of the same tools apply. When we talk about any kind of behavior, we know that there is always a function of the behavior. There is some reason why it's happening and continues to happen. Now, clearly there are some behaviors that happen once and, we don't do them again. And I'm talking about us. I don't actually remember, but my mother tells me that when I was little, I stuck my hand on the stove and that I didn't do it anymore because it hurt like the dickens. And so it was a behavior that I never wanted to do. She always felt bad about it because she wished she could have stopped it, right? And prevented it from happening. But it was 100% clear to me as a child. I touched the stove. It was unpleasant. I wasn't going to do it again. Sometimes with our kids on the autism spectrum, we'll see behaviors that actually hurt the child that they continue to do. It's particularly disturbing to us. Sometimes even in the midst of a tantrum, a child will do something like bang their head on the floor or, hit their head on a wall, things that hurt themselves and you think, oh, it's just horrifying. And then they do it again and again and again. And I think there's something emotional about that is really hard to handle as a parent. My son was certainly one of those kids. He would go in and bang his head on the kitchen floor until he was sobbing. And of course, I'd be running across the house to get to the kitchen floor. And he would literally walk into the kitchen, lay down and smack his head against the floor. And it gave me migraines because it was so stressful, right? But the thing I want you to know, and you're really not going to like this, but stick with me, is that all of those behaviors have a function. There is some sort of a payoff for the child, and that is why they are engaging in the behavior. Principle number one in ABA is that in order for any behavior to be maintained, it has to be reinforcing. And you can reject that, and that's fine, but I want you to look at it and say, at least, is this true? Is this true? Could this possibly be true? And in the beginning, I was like, that can't possibly be true. We all do things over and over and over again that don't have a payoff, right? And then I started looking at it and going, okay, wait a second. That does have a payoff. Sometimes the payoff isn't immediately evident. And sometimes the payoff isn't something that we are happy and content with as a viewer, right? Because sometimes it's a negative thing. But nonetheless, it's a payoff for the person who's engaging in the behavior. So we need to at least investigate that. You don't have to believe me. I want you to take it out and be a field scientist and ask yourself, all right, is this true? Think about the most recent tantrum that your child had. And if it's a tantrum that happens on a regular basis, we want to do the same thing that we were talking about yesterday with biting. We want to take a piece of paper and draw 2 lines on it so that we end up with 3 columns. And we're going to label those columns A, B, and C. So the A stands for antecedent, the B, which is the middle column, is the behavior, and the C column is the consequence, right? And we're just going to dispassionately view our child and the way that they behave, and we're going to start to keep a tantrum log. We're going to keep that little piece of paper. We can fold it up really tiny, put it in our wallet, put it in our pocket, put it in our purse. I have a friend who stuffs things into her brassiere, wherever you need to put it so that you have access to it on a regular basis and you know where it is. Other people put it on the refrigerator, whatever works for you. But when a tantrum comes up, you are going to write it down on this piece of paper. I always like to start with the middle column, behavior. That's the way I was taught to do it because that's the thing that's freshest in our mind, right? It's just 100% clear and we want to get it when it's fresh in our mind. Obviously, you're not going to do this during the tantrum, but the first available moment afterward. We're going to write down what they call it, the therapists and the BCBAs call it the topography of the behavior. This cracks me up. It's, what does it look like? What is the behavior? What was the behavior? Your child was in the grocery store and they laid down in the grocery store and kicked their arms and their legs and screamed and cried and then rolled over on their stomach and refused to get up. Right? That's the topography of the behavior. That's exactly what it looked like. That's exactly what it was. And you can write that and get really descriptive. It's really, the more descriptive you are, the better. Okay, so you got the behavior, and I always like to mark down the time and the place as well. You know, it's going to be really helpful. And then the next thing that you want to write down is the consequence for it. So what happened after the behavior happened? How did it all end up? Did the little old lady the next aisle over come over and say, you know, sweetheart, if you get up off that floor, I'll give you a lollipop, while you sat there and went, don't say that? Or what happened? Like, did you scoop the child up and tuck them under your arm and leave your basket of groceries and go out to the car, and then you had another tantrum as you were putting them in the car seat? You know, what happened as a result of this behavior? You'd be surprised. I mean, there's something that happens when you have to look at it this way and you have to write it down and you go, oh, well, this happened. Oh, that probably wasn't good. Don't judge yourself, right? You're in the process of learning something, so write down what it actually was. You will learn something from it. And I'll share my own stuff here in just a second. So you've got the behavior written down and you've got the consequence written down. Now is when you have to travel back in time mentally in your head and say, okay, so what happened right before the behavior? Because that's going to be your A column. The antecedent is what happened before. So were things just going along fine and your child just, you know, slid to the floor? Something happened. And sometimes it's not immediately evident what happens, but take the time to think it through and think, okay, well, you know, so what was it? Did you just say, you know, we're not going to have time to go look at the birthday cake aisle? Did you just say, you know, give me back that toy that we looked at, and because we have to put it back, we're going to get in line to pay and we're not getting that toy? Did they see a friend 2 aisles over and you said hi and they had a conversation and then you walked away? What happened that started the slide into the tantrum? And you know, I think it's the hardest part for parents because we have so much going on in the moment, and sometimes we miss little things, little cues. But do your best and know that you're not going to be perfect in the A column. But you can make up for it in the B column because you sure saw the behavior, right? And in the C column, it's, you know, no judgment. You write down, well, here's what happened. And so you end up with this A, this B, and the C. And then you just, once you get it all there, you draw a line underneath of it and you wait for the next tantrum. And you do the same thing for the next tantrum. And what you will see across a couple of days or a week, depending on how often your child is tantruming, is you will see patterns start to emerge. Depending on how difficult your tantrums are, you want to call in an expert. And if the tantrums are persisting or they're violent in nature, really you want to call in an expert as soon as possible. But if they're just run-of-the-mill, and by the way, all kids have tantrums. This is not a part of autism. This is a part of life. Kids have tantrums. And there's a specific window in which children typically begin tantrums, and it's the period of time in which they realize that there's language, but their expressive language has not caught up with often their receptive language. They know, I want that cookie, and I don't know how to get it. So I'm going to flip out, and hopefully you're going to give me that cookie. It's not efficient, but let's remember that that's how they got the cookie always before. They cried, right? When they were babies, they cried, and we gave them food. So why would they assume that it's anything different until we teach them? Now, hopefully, with typically developing children, as they gain language, at some point, they make the connection for themselves and go, you know, I don't have to cry anymore. I can just say cookie and they get all smiley and they give me that cookie. For our kids on the spectrum, that isn't going to happen organically. most of the time, right? There are all kinds of other issues that are preventing this child from making that connection. I ask for the cookie, you give me the cookie. Sometimes there's a whole, physical thing that's happening that they're literally not capable of making the sound for cookie. But sometimes it's sensory things. But in any case, they are not getting to that functional communication, which is when we would typically see the tantrums start to decrease. But we can help them to get those functional communication skills, but we also need to be looking at what is happening, when is it happening, to be able to combat things in a lot of different ways. So we keep these columns and we start to see patterns emerge. And what you might see is, and I mentioned this yesterday with biting, there's 4 usual suspects that you can look for. And one of the big ones for tantrums, especially within a certain age range of our kids, because they don't have functional communication skills yet, is access to someone or something. They want the cookie, they want dad, they want mom, they want the book, they want the Woody doll, they want the ball that the other child is playing with. They have wants, they have needs, they have desires. There's things that they want and there's no other way of getting it. I always like to say, if aliens picked me up today and took me to their planet and they looked different and they sounded different and I didn't know their language and they had tentacles instead of hands, so I wouldn't understand their gestures, I would have no way of communicating with them in the beginning. So I would have no way of telling them, I'm hot, I'm tired, my feet hurt, I need to go to the bathroom, I need something to drink, and I need something that, tastes like this, or I need something soft on my skin that doesn't have a label that's scratching me. I have no way of conveying that to them. So how long do we think I would go before I started being really mad and throwing things and kicking aliens and if they gave me some glop that wasn't what I needed, if they gave me some strange glop that was brown and didn't taste good and what I wanted was water, I'd be throwing that food. I'm an adult, but I would be throwing a hissy because I would have no way of getting my needs met, and I would be trying anything to get them met. And our kids, in a sense, they're new to the planet. They don't know the rules. And the rules that we've had from birth are, when you cry, I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to give you attention. I'm going to feed you, and I'm going to change your state. I'm going to change your diaper. I'm going to put something on you, take something off you until you're happy again. So our expectation that they're going to stop that all on their own, we have to let go of that, right? It is serving a purpose. We need to figure out what the purpose is, and then we can monkey with it. So let's say that, for instance, I like to tell the story of the tantrum. My son had lots of different tantrums for lots of different reasons, right? But there was the one tantrum that he would have in one particular store, and when I was keeping my chart and I started to notice, well, the tantrum happens in this store over and over and over again, and it's always when we go from this one particular area to this other particular area in the grocery store. And so now I'm being Sherlock Holmes, and I'm trying to figure it out. And initially, when you go into this store, it's a wonderful store, and they have, you walk through the produce, and then they have the fish counter, and they always have an octopus that they lay out on the ice, and the little legs are out there. Well, my son always, as soon as he was gaining language, we would walk into the store, and he would say, octopus, right? And so it was a big treat that we're going to go and look at the octopus. And there were other things that were happening in the store too, that he loved this store. But then we would leave the octopus and come around the corner by the dairy, and he would completely lose it, you guys. Just completely lose it and be on the floor and be screaming. And one time he literally overturned our cart, and there was a newborn baby in the cart next to us, and the cart just missed their cart. I still shudder about it. And I began to think, okay, well, maybe it's something about the octopus, and I tried all these antecedent modifications on my own, right? Because I'm trying to be clever about this. So we would have a conversation before we would go in the store. And I would say, okay, we're going to go in the store, and you're not going to get to look at the octopus until we do everything else in the store, and then we'll come back and look at the octopus. I'm thinking, if this is a rewarding thing, and maybe he's hating leaving the octopus. And we went through the store, didn't see the octopus, and got to that place in the aisle, and he completely fell apart. I'm like, all right, well, and I said, come on, because we're going to do this really quick, and then we're going to go see the octopus. No, that wasn't happening. I tried taking him to the octopus and giving a big, long countdown and saying, we're going to leave the octopus. Is that okay? Yes, yes, yes. And we'll come back to the octopus if you're being a good boy. Completely lose it. And I'm trying all these different variables, trying to figure out different times of the day, saying different things beforehand, promising him the sun, the moon, and the stars if we don't have a tantrum in the store, and the tantrums are getting worse. Now, this is a really good indication of not having found the right function of the behavior. If it's getting worse and it's not getting better, then after a certain amount of time, you got to say, not working. I eventually had to call in a BCBA and say, help me. These tantrums it was after he tipped the cart and I thought that it was going to hurt the baby. I said, this is getting bad and I don't understand it. And I've taken my, what I know, and I'm not getting it. I just don't see what's maintaining this behavior. I just couldn't see it. And BCBA came in, looked at my information, and said, let's go to the store. I got to see this. And very quickly saw that, I was thinking it was access to something or attention or, and what it was escape, because the floor tile changed right where the transition, because I said, what's weird is that it's always in the same place, which I would not have realized had I not kept the chart, right? But it was always, we went from the fish counter around the corner and went to the dairy, and there is a very distinct line in the floor where it goes from this very slick, shiny floor to a tiled floor, and he would lose it. And I could have looked at this for 100 years and not have realized that that's what was going on. But the BCBA looked at it and said, there's a floor tile change. We need to, are there other times when this child is tantruming when he gets onto tiled floor? And of course my answer was no. And I started thinking back about, because I don't notice that kind of thing, and thinking, we would always have a tantrum when we would leave Disneyland. Always. And I would think it was just too much sensory input from Disneyland. But when you go up in the parking structure to go to the car, there's a strip of tile that you can walk on to get to the further cars down, and then step off onto the concrete. And we would always have a tantrum there. And I had not put that together. Well, what they did was have him go through a systematic desensitization. And now my son doesn't even notice it when he walks on tile. We go in that grocery store 3 times a week, and, he doesn't even notice. He's like me now. We take him to Disneyland, and there's no tantrum when we leave Disneyland. Well, I could have looked and looked and looked at that, and I would never have found it. So I do like to say that as a cautionary tale of not spending a whole lot of time not referring to an expert. But if we do find the function of the behavior, I'll tell you what happens. You start looking at the tantrum and going, oh, well, I completely understand why that's happening. I completely get it. This is what the function of this behavior is. This is why it's happening. And you get excited because you realize I can change the consequence, or I can change the antecedent, or I can change the antecedent and the consequence, or I can, and always, I can give my child this to do instead of the tantrum. Which is pretty amazing. So we're going to talk more about this in the last hour of the day, but start to look at the behavior as behavior, right? It's not your fault. It's not the child's fault. It's simply a way of behaving. When a baby cries and we need to give it a bottle, we don't get all, why is this happening, right? But especially when we're out in public, when our children are tantrum, that's how we feel sometimes, right? Go back to baby years and say, it's behavior. I didn't cause this behavior. My child is communicating to me. I just got to figure out what. As soon as I figure out what they're communicating, then we can change what's happening, and get excited about that.